Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we discuss the reunion between the Wolf King Leman Russ and the Raven Lord Corax. General spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, as well as events specifically from the Horus Heresy novel Corax by Gav Thorpe. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, I originally wanted to talk about this last week, before our discussion about the Lion and Russ's fractured relationship. Unfortunately, as we know, I had to take the pup to the vets rather unexpectedly, but the good news is she's all fine, and so we can finish our conversations today. There's something about Corax I've always just loved. The look, the style. He's always felt like a badass, no-nonsense Primarch, yet one of the most human and relatable too. One of the first moments I remember getting into the Heresy series was just him obliterating Lorgar at Istvan. If there was one Primarch I could see hanging out on the side of a gunship with Fortunate Son blaring in the background, well, it's Corax. And the reason I wanted to have a discussion about Russ and Corax's reunion is because it gives a very different look and perception of Russ than the one we usually see. And their particular reunion takes place near the very end of the Heresy, in the aftermath of Russ facing Horus. As we know, Leman Russ felt a duty, and that it was his responsibility, to face Horus one last time. And so he left the throne world in order to do so, leading his already wounded legion on a would-be suicidal charge against the Sons of Horus. And I really recommend checking out the novel Wolfsbane if you haven't, as it covers this event. It's an absolutely adrenaline-pumping ride as the wolves crash into the fleet, making a beeline straight for the Vengeful Spirit, boarding and fighting their way through its halls in search of the War Master. Yeah, I'm biased as a Space Wolf fan, but I really think anyone would enjoy that read. Now, Leman Russ would wound the War Master with the Emperor's Spear. However, in hesitating to speak with his brother, Horus would ultimately wound Russ terribly, his life only being saved through the sacrifice of hundreds of his sons, desperately falling back through the enemy vessel, trying to carry their unconscious Primarch. They would successfully escape, but what was left of the Legion was in tatters. Russ had taken the ultimate gamble, and due to the affection he had for his first ever brother, he had very nearly lost everything. The Space Wolves, with a still unconscious Russ, were chased to the system of Yarant, where they were besieged upon its third world. An overwhelming force of Sons of Horus, Alpha Legion, World Eaters, and Thousand Sons was arrayed against them. The end of the Space Wolves Legion was just a matter of time. However, it was then that Corax and his Raven Guard arrived. Corax had been fighting his war against the traitor forces behind enemy lines throughout the entire Heresy. Arriving in system, Corax fought through the enemy blockade, and having located the Space Wolves' final stronghold, he reunited with his still comatose brother Russ. Now, there's been precious little written about the relationship between the Raven Lord and the Wolf King, and although they might not have had a BFF bromance, you certainly get the feeling and perception it was one of the better relationships between the brothers. When speaking with the Sons of Russ, Corax actually understands some Fenrisian, remarking that he learnt it from his brother. So not only does that imply time spent around each other, it also implies to me a fairly healthy relationship. Russ wouldn't waste time teaching a brother Fenrisian if he didn't like them or at least respect them. This isn't just 1 or 2 words. Corax knows enough to be able to understand a private conversation. So again, while Primarchs can learn things extremely quickly, it certainly showcases a good history between the two. And this relationship is further evident when Corax is shown his still unconscious brother, as the Space Wolves agree to give Corax a moment alone with Russ. There's guards outside the door, of course, but the two Primarchs are alone. I can't think of many who the Sons of Russ would trust enough to even contemplate this, even if it was a brother Primarch. Corax himself, of course, has had a bit of a rough time throughout the heresy, having seen his legion virtually obliterated, and then having had the Alpha Legion corrupt his attempts at rebuilding those numbers. So with all this in mind, the Primarch that arrives to Russ is not the Raven Lord as he once was. This is a man who feels the weight of everything that's transpired so far. The fault of Primarchs turning on Primarchs, how he didn't slay Curzon Lorgar when he had the chance, how he didn't stand before Angron, the very nature of him and his brothers, the essence of the warp inside them. It's really all taken its toll on the mind of Corax, and it's really beginning to get to the point of the Primarch who we know would later depart for the Eye of Terror. And so with all this in mind, rather than a "hey, how you doing" to his brother, Corax instead uses his time as a bit of a confessional, relaying how in his own mistakes at making Astartes, he realizes that he and his fellow Primarchs are in turn mistakes too, and how he feels the Emperor must know. That's the heresy, the galaxy aflame. It's the universe correcting itself. The essence of the warp inside them is unnatural, that they are creations that should simply not exist. And now the universe seeks to right all those wrongs. The feeling of guilt from Corax is just palpable in every word he speaks. You can just feel it overwhelming his nature. Guilt for his mutated sons, guilt for the heresy, and guilt that he survived, where his brothers could not. And he even fears the manipulation of the ruinous powers in his actions, that maybe they have been involved in allowing him to escape. And all of this is just so overwhelming in Corax's mindset that he has no intention of escaping Yarant, that instead he has come here to sacrifice himself and his men in one final stand, to buy time for the Space Wolves to escape, to achieve one small moment of redemption in this honourable last act. And really, I just can't help wondering here that Corax is almost letting all of this out to Russ in the smallest hope that his brother would open his eyes and belay those fears, to give him a measure of reassurance, even if it is to just say, well, if that's how you feel. Russ isn't the kind of Primarch who's going to dissuade you from your feelings. You really get the sense in my mind here that Corax looks to Russ as that symbolic solid rock, that he's confessing this for some form of reassurance. Corax was one of the last found, and Russ one of the first, so it is entirely possible that he looks up to him. We'll never know for sure, but it's certainly the feeling that I got. After this impromptu confession, Corax calls in the Sons of Russ, telling them of his intentions, to give them the opportunity to escape. However, they of course refuse. No son of Fenris is going to run from a fight. and so he asks them if they want to die. And then, in that moment, Russ awakens. He's weak, barely able to move, his voice still a whisper, but he awakens nonetheless. And he asks his brother, "Do you?" The Wolf King asks the Raven Lord if he came here to fight or to die. And it's not revealed explicitly if Russ has heard the words of his brother, but with this question, to me it really feels like he did. That somehow or some way, Russ has willed himself to open his eyes, using whatever strength he has left within him to speak to his brother. And there's a really interesting description of Corax's stomach just dropping. That feeling you get sometimes in certain moments of genuine emotional dread. And I think Corax knows then that his brother has heard him, because he's asked the one question that needed to be asked. The question that Corax dreads to answer. There's no doubt Corax is dealing with real emotional struggles throughout the heresy. He has one of the most human stories going. It's one that I genuinely feel that we can all associate with on some kind of level. And the sense he gets when asked that single question is a real genuinely human moment, and one that I can really appreciate. Now Russ speaks to his brother here in a real interesting and subtle way. Corax, unable to answer Russ's question, instead asks him what's happened, and Russ just kind of throws it off as well, it doesn't exactly matter, not allowing Corax to change the subject, and he struggles to lift himself up to a sitting position. And this is a Wolf King we have never seen before. A physically weak man, removing that ever-present image of a strident god of war. Here, he struggles to even raise his head. He then calls for his men to give him the Emperor's spear, and this of course sows a bit of confusion between them, as they all know he hates the weapon. However then, he reveals why. And Russ tells a story of when the Emperor gave him the spear. The following night he received a dream that one day he would die in battle wielding this weapon. And well, given that, it doesn't exactly make sense for him to want to tempt fate, which is why he's never used it. However, he wields it then. Now, whether or not this story is true or not, we don't actually know. However, it is a clear message to his brother, a hidden meaning beneath the words. This to me is Russ clearly telling him he heard him speak. The brotherhood between them, that he's not going to let him make this stand alone. That if he's going to give his life in one final glorious moment, one honourable last stand, then his brother is going to be there by his side. It's a real touching unspoken message between the two, and a real great look at the true nature of Russ, the brother within, not the blustering Wolf King so often seen. This is a Russ free from the famous rivalries, and it's really a side of him I'd love to see more of. The two brothers then share a look in silence, the message between them unspoken, and again we don't know exactly what thoughts they're having, but for me it's a real moment of connection between two brothers. Russ's way of telling Corax he understands. And then there's a real key line when Russ finally speaks. We each carry our past with us. His way of telling Corax, we've all got scars. We've all made mistakes. Again, it's a story within a story, A message within a message. But it's these kind of moments that really speak to the beauty of the heresy. For all the grimdark, for all the campaigns and grand-scale battles, it's a simple moment of connection between two lost brothers. One letting the other one know, you're not in this alone. I really hope one day we get a glimpse of how this relationship between the two was established, showing Russ and Corax on campaign together within the Great Crusade, the bond and respect that was fostered between the two. Because look, from the outside just looking in, they're two very different natures. You'd expect there to be little between them. Corax quiet by nature, an ambush style of warfare, whereas Russ loud and a very much in-your-face nature. Yet clearly there was a connection between the two, and the bonds of brotherhood that so often went missing was instead fostered here. Can you imagine Russ and Corax meeting within the Eye of Terror now? What a moment that would be, given the past we know they share. However, as it was, Russ would again pass out as he attempts to stand, the effort simply too much for his wounds. Maybe the defiant Wolf King spirit roused by the presence of his brother, before his body was truly ready. As we know, Corax would ultimately realise he has more to fight for in his father's name, and so the sons of the Raven Lord and the Wolf King would live to fight another day, evacuating the planet beneath an orbital bombardment as Corax's fleet tore the traitors asunder. It was only a brief moment of reconciliation, but a really impactful one. A moment where we got to see the bonds of brotherhood, where we got to see the man beneath the mask of Leman Russ, and so too the doubts of Corax sharing in confidence with his brother. Again, so often with these interactions for me, it just makes you yearn to see more, to see how and why this relationship was fostered, why these two Primarchs established a good relationship where so often and so many others failed. As always guys, what do you think? Why do you think Russ and Corax seemingly fostered a good relationship, whereas so many others failed, in particular with regards to the Wolf King? Why do you feel that Corax was having to confess his doubts to his brother? And what do you think Russ was trying to tell him? How do you think a reunion between the two would play out within the Eye of Terror some 10,000 years later? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.